That we're not headed towards socialism per se. That's another one of the divisive issues to get the left against you because they think that's anti-Obama. It's more fascism, totalitarianism, centralization, corporatism.
And that's the bigger issue I see too, is the corporate influence.
You could ask her
what
she's doing to counter all of this negativity that we're talking about in the government.
Obviously, you were part of this group, this movement. You had these feelings before Barack Obama was president.
Yes.
You supported Ron Paul. So what do you think about the established Republican Party?
Oh, I was actually a delegate to the RNC in 2008. And the established Republican Party is a joke and a fraud. They are top down, they are controlling, manipulative, and what they are doing is trying to hijack movements like the Tea Party. That's why you have both a corporate Tea Party and a grassroots Tea Party. I don't so much like the corporate Tea Party. I really like the grassroots Tea Party.
And the Democrats?
Same thing. I actually come from a very left kind of background. The anti-war movement was my issue before Ron Paul. Animal rights was my issue before I'm a vegetarian, before ending the war. And I decided that the Democrats were a joke and a fraud in 2006 when Nancy Pelosi said the war was going to end and it didn't.
Just a generic question, and you'll look at it like it's that. Why do you think people are so mad? Why are so many grassroots organizations starting in the past few years? What do you see out there?
I think people are upset because they're being personally affected by the decisions our government is making. Take my parents, for example. They own a small business, an animal clinic. As a child, growing up, watching my parents having to constantly fight eminent domain, tax audits, when they were just trying to do their job and live their life and be happy people, I have personally witnessed and had in my personal life the negative influence of government, and people are starting to feel it all over the board. They're having trouble surviving, and yet these big corporate conglomerates are being bailed out with our tax dollars when we could be feeding our children and our families with that. It's not very fair.
Back to the fusion centers. Tell me a little bit more about what you've done. Like you said to me, you've gone places, you've seen things. Walk me through a little of that, if you would.
Well, I first learned about fusion centers last year in 2009. I believe it was March 6th when the news broke that a report had been issued to all Missouri law enforcement saying people like me, people who voted for Ron Paul, people who voted for Chuck Baldwin, people who were against the NAFTA superhighway and centralization of power, people who were against the Federal Reserve should all be considered potentially radical, violent militia members. I had no idea what a fusion center was. In fact, that week, there was the National Homeland Security Fusion Center Conference in my hometown in Kansas City. I did not go to the ACLU protest because I didn't know what they were. Well, I found out when that report was released. I immediately started digging in. What is this fusion center? What is the Missouri Information Analysis Center? And I found out that in Missouri there are 4 fusion centers. One is run by state government, 2 are run by city, and 1 is run by a private corporation. That's a regional one that shares information with 6 states. And I began to testify in legislative hearings in front of the Missouri legislature about these fusion centers, and I used each of the hearings as a deadline for me to do as much research as I possibly could. So I started researching the databases that they use, instances of fraud, abuse, misuse, also looking into the positive things that fusion centers do. But at that point, I really began to learn about sovereignty and how important the decentralization of power was. So after testifying in those 4 hearings, I became a delegate to the Continental Congress. I know you guys interviewed Bob Schultz. And I met John Bush, who was the delegate from Texas. Now, I was fighting fusion centers in Missouri. He was fighting them down here in Austin. And we realized that no one else there knew what a fusion center was. And we realized that there's a major lack of knowledge and information and understanding about these fusion centers and about the intelligence gathering practices of our law enforcement community. So we created a project called Operation Defuse, and so far in 2010 we have visited I believe 8 fusion centers. We've put presentations on in I think 14 different cities, and we have been sitting down getting to know the people who are working in these fusion centers and showing them, hey, we're not threats, we're peaceful people, we don't believe in the initiation of force. Let's find a better way to handle our intelligence. Let's find a better way to try and identify potential crimes. It doesn't have to be through political profiling. We even went to the DHS National Fusion Center Conference as the grassroots media in New Orleans this year, and it was absolutely hilarious how they responded. We were given FBI tails they were our media liaisons, and so they followed us around and asked us all sorts of questions, and they called security on us, and they ended up letting us in and letting us do our thing, but they had never had someone from the quote independent media show up, and they didn't really know how to react to it. It was pretty funny.
How big is this group?
Which group?
Your Liberation Restoration Project.
Liberty Restoration
Liberty
Project.
Restoration.
We actually don't have any official members. We work with groups all over the country. We have a nationwide following.
Right.
If you consider our Facebook members and our email list, I could probably send an email to probably 7,000 people at the click of a button and let people know that things are happening. But we also network with other groups like Gary Franchi with Restore the Republic. At this time last year, he had a 50,000 person mailing list, and he's the reason that we were able to get our action items to have the MIAC report retracted, sent out. So we have a lot of supporters, but no official members at all.
That's good, huh? You get one more?
Yeah. One of the things that someone else in our office actually